Hello, everyone, and we are live here on SciComm Happy Hour on my channel. I am Trace. Maybe you recognize me from all of the other videos on this channel. I would imagine you do. Please let me know if you have any questions in the chat, and I'm gonna go ahead and cook it over to this side. That's Kishore. Hi, Kishore. Welcome to SciComm Happy Hour. You haven't been here in a while.
Hi, it's good to be back. I remember this thing where we started it so that we could just talk about nerdy stuff with our friends that have worked in science communication forever. So I'm glad to be back. And it's been way too long. I needed like a dose of like sciencey goodness, so I'm ready for this happy hour.
We also have with us and below us in the stream, right below me is Rohin. Hi, Rohin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me along.
Can you tell everybody a bit about kind of what your SciComm is, or what you're all about?
Sure. Well, I'm feeling a little bit out of place here. I feel like a bit of a rank amateur.
What?
But
the doctor feels like the amateur in this group.
Yeah, so that's right. I'm a doctor. I'm a heart doctor in London, in the UK. I work just outside London, but I live in London, and feel like I've come to SciComm reasonably recently. I started a YouTube channel a couple of years ago, and that's how I have got to know Trace and do stuff on Twitter and various different all the regular social platforms under the name Midlife Crisis. And so I tried to blend a bit of medical education with some comedy and lots of dad jokes, and it's been fun. It's become like a kind of second career now, so very enjoyable.
Nice.
The Midlife Crisis is one of the better names for a newish YouTube channel in a long time.
Yeah.
Well, and then we also have with us today Mike Rugnetta, who is I don't know how to point. I'm going to stop trying. Who you may recognize from PBS Idea Channel or his podcast Reasonably Sound, or he's also doing Fun City Ventures. Can you tell us a bit about what you're doing with yourself these days, Mike?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mike. It's nice to see everybody. I am a writer and producer of digital series, mostly YouTube shows and podcasts. Today, what am I doing today? The thing that I work on the most is Fun City Ventures, or just Fun City, which is a uh, actual play tabletop role playing podcast that it takes place in a post climate catastrophe New York City in the year 2101. And
Oh, I thought you were
I'm
going to say like 2022.
we I mean,
That's that's still during the apocalypse. That's not
Yeah.
post-apocalypse.
Rohin got it, nailed it exactly. We wanted there to be some, hope for the rebuilt New York, and so fast forwarded, enough years that it could have transpired. And yeah, that's a show where I'm the dungeon master or the game master, and the producer, and me and the players sort of go on cyberpunky adventures in a futuristic New York City. Yeah, that's kind of like what I do the most these days.
I love that. I
Aw.
want to go on a cyberpunk adventure in New York City in the future. But
Hey,
if you're there. If you're not
You
I was
know,
gonna say-
Trace, if you go down the right streets in New York, you can go on a cyberpunk adventure now.
That's very true. Also, I just want to say I'm going to call Trace out and say that when he asked me to be on SciComm Happy Hour, I did offer. I was like, I don't know if you would be interested in this, but if you and the other guests want to just play a game of Dungeons and Dragons or your role-playing game of choice, I would happily lead it. So
I think.
Did you not say yes to this?
the option's open to you.
I wanted to.
We can
run
play
it by
a
you.
Shadowrun game whenever you want.
I wanted to run it by you first. But I think what we should do is, remember when we watched Apollo 13 and then we just streamed the whole thing? I think we should just do that.
Yeah, my rule is generally when anyone asks you to play D&D and it's not quite midnight, you should just say yes.
That seems
Like
fair.
D&D is like Gremlins, never after midnight. Like bad things happen.
I don't know.
In college, we had a nod. If it were after 2 a.m. and you looked at somebody else in our group and you went, and then it was time to go to Shake Shack, and then we would all just get up and go. And so after a while, we would all sorry, not Shake Shack, Steak and Shake. We didn't have Shake Shack in the Midwest, but like it was time to go get burgers and stuff. So it was fun. It was really fun. And there were occasions where we'd be at a party with mixed company and somebody would look at somebody else in our friend group and just nod. And then we'd all get up and be like, cool, we're going to Steak and Shake. See you guys.
You would just abandon those people?
No, we would all end up going usually.
I've been waiting weeks to say this statement. So, Rohin, as a cardiologist, what do you think about Trace going to get burgers and fries at 2 a.m. with his friend via head nod? Like, do you think this is a good, solid behavior for his future?
I mean, it's a commonly accepted medical fact that calories between midnight and 6 a.m. don't actually count. So that's fine.
Science.
Science.
This holds up. This holds up.
So now that we've done our intros and we kind of warmed up a little bit, I do want to kind of jump into what we wanted to talk about today. But before I mention that, I want to say thank you to Heather, because Heather donated to our charity already today. She donated $50, you guys. That's crazy. Thank you, Heather.
Hero.
Awesome.
Hero.
Thank you.
During this whole stream, you can download to the Center for Policing Equity. It says so at the bottom of the screen. And you can donate right here on YouTube. If you're on Twitch, you can pop over to YouTube and donate. I don't really have a good system over on Twitch for doing that. But the Center for Policing Equity. So thanks, Heather, and thanks to anybody else who donates. That's awesome. But today we're sort of like, I'm trying to come up with themes for each of our streams. And today is sort of like humans and humanities, like a little bit. Because Rohin wanted to talk about how it is the 20th anniversary of the Human Genome Project. That is so cool. I did not know that. Can you tell us a little more?
Today.
Literally today?
Literally today, yeah.
That's cool.
When I first thought about it, because I read something the other day and I thought it was just this week, but yeah, the actual announcement of the kind of publication of the first genome was today, 20 years ago. And I just thought it would be an interesting. I'm not a geneticist or anything. I did a bit of genetics research many years ago, but it's had a monumental impact on not only my field of medicine, but many areas of science. And it's kind of hard to overemphasize the effect it's had on science as a whole, and it's maybe even hard to imagine a lot of things what they were like before the Human Genome Project. So it's often kind of compared to the Apollo mission as a kind of defining moment. And you know, Tracy, you've been covering a lot of space exploration stuff recently, and a lot of those big landmarks feel sort of like the distant past. I went to a 50th anniversary party for the first heart transplant, and it just feels like a long time ago. But this is something I remember. You know, it was sort of interviews for university and things around that time. So it was a really hot topic that we all had to talk about. So it's a lot has happened in 20 years, and I guess some of the big contributions of the Human Genome Project have been things like, I mean, starting with medicine, sort of the promise maybe initially of we'll be able to cure diseases in the next few years didn't transpire. But I think it's unfair to call it to say that that's a failure or anything. We understand much more about a lot of diseases, that how they are actually sort of caused by many genes interacting rather than just single genetic abnormalities. Cancer has really been changed a great deal. We understand a lot more about how specific cancers can be treated, and you know, it's led to a phrase you probably heard, personalized medicine, is a big focus at the moment. Things like, you know, it's now a commonly known thing that a lot of people in the West are 2% Neanderthal. That's knowledge that came from the Human Genome Project. And just, you know, it took 10 years to produce the first one. It cost 3 billion. And now we can sequence a genome in 3.5 minutes, and for about $200 for a sort of gold standard sequence. For a cheap one, even less than that, $100, as anybody can get from all these companies that sell them. So, you know, I think it's a monumental moment in science in general.
I think we're seeing like the impacts of the Human Genome Project now as we're grappling with the pandemic. Like the majority of testing that we're using, this PCR testing, is largely related to advances that came about from the Human Genome Project, like the advances in the technology, the machines, even the supply chains that kind of grew out of these machines kind of coming into existence, is a testament to that. You know, as somebody that has worked in biological sciences for a long time, it like I want to reinforce what you said, Rohin. Like this was like an Apollo level program for biology and biological sciences, and I think it opened up this possibility that we could really cure and manage a number of diseases in a way that we couldn't before, and do it at scale, and not be just like bounded by sort of like country borders, which have historically and still continue to hold back advances in medicine.
Has that actually
Yeah, I mean,
come to fruition a little bit too? Like, sorry to jump in there, but like, have we, because of the genome, are there specific things you can point to? It's like, oh, if we didn't have the genome, blah, 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 we wouldn't have had this thing or that, other than, you know, like ancestry data and stuff, which is shaky at best.
yeah, so I guess, you know, a commonly given example is cystic fibrosis, and understanding the genetics of that. But that's a disease where the genetics are quite simple. So, but that's, you know, really changed how we manage that. And a lot of rare conditions which have maybe just similarly a single mutation causing the problem. So the treatment of those has been revolutionized, but a lot of those only affect small numbers of people, so they're not necessarily in the wider public consciousness. And as I mentioned earlier, cancer is really the one that has seen the biggest changes. There are some cancers where it does come down to a small number of mutations. So again, another commonly given example is the BRCA gene for breast cancer, and all of that being able to identify people who are at high risk has come out of the Human Genome Project as well. The rest of it, it's still a work in progress. So, it was still very much at the beginning of this journey, I think, even 20 years on, because other conditions that kill a lot of people, like heart disease, are just very complex. They're not caused by a single mutation.
Wait,
Yeah.
Kishore, can you say more about the impact that the sequencing of the human genome has had on medicine vis-a-vis borders? I've never heard that before.
I mean, like, just like put it this way, like there's rapid advances in cost reductions that are associated with the Human Genome Project. Like we have sequencing technology now that can be miniaturized and put into locations with a proper supply chain that couldn't have been done before. So, back in 2000, when it was costing, hundreds of millions of dollars to run a sequence, we couldn't really be proactive and look for certain pathogens. Let's say coronaviruses that were transferring from a bat to a human host. Now we can have field stations set up in countries around the world and really have a surveillance system using like some of the genetic sequencers that are out there. There's a lot of efforts underway. They're imperfect. I'm not presenting that as like a situation where we solve this, but it is a related kind of consequence from the Human Genome Project. Our ability to use to build that kind of infrastructure now, and now that takes apart, like, viruses don't care about borders. Viruses are going to go where viruses are going to go. But now we have like some technology that allows us to break down some of the ways that science has been held in certain Western nations in terms of the technology, and have it spread more equally. I say more because it's
like
by no
anything,
means
yeah.
equal, right?
Right.
But like I also don't want to like sit here and lionize the Human Genome Project as this perfect thing. And I think, Rohin, you feel that way too, right? Like this isn't like, we can't just like sit there and put it up like this is the pinnacle of scientific achievement. It had its flaws too.
Yeah, it very much. I mean, the story itself about how it came to be, and to start with the positives. And you made a great point, Kishore, about the borders and countries coming together, because it was a race between a publicly funded initiative and a private company headed up by Craig Venter called Celera, which wanted to essentially patent DNA and then sell to the information to the highest bidder. So this was sort of held up as a kind of fight for the heart of genetic knowledge. And then there was this moment where they came together, and then this statement that we're talking about today, 20 years ago, which actually wasn't the final genome, that came in 2003. But they came together, and it was meant to be this moment where everybody kind of settled their differences, and we're going to be working towards a sort of common goal. But then I'm not sure that necessarily transpired, and different countries sort of said, we're going to take this section, and I think there was a bit of splintering. And now in the last few years, without wanting to get too political, we are seeing a withdrawal from a kind of international collaboration. I'm not just referring to the US, but here in the UK, one of the huge negative impacts of Brexit is the massive amounts of collaboration between European science teams, with UK in a really prominent position. I'm not sure if that's going to still be there after Brexit. So yeah, it's a different political landscape at the moment.
It brought to the fore in this country all the cases around DNA patenting that were fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and that are still continually fought. Like all of it, like there are these massive implications from it, and that's why it's like the Apollo mission. Like if we really dissect like the Apollo mission, not everything that came out of Apollo led to all these positive things. It was a little messy, But at least for a moment in time, I think it like generated this kind of singular focus of what was possible. And I can't think of a moment in my lifetime that I feel like I need that again, of this sense of here's what's possible when we do all kind of come together. Maybe science is one of the banners we come under, but I do still view the Human Genome Project as like a spectacular achievement that has some weird ramifications. It definitely has some weird ramifications in how we discuss race, especially in this country, because of one of the things they looked at was looking at the that was a defining character. Is race like a biological constraint? Is a conversation that emerged out of the Human Genome Project. P.S. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, P.S.
It was really fascinating. I haven't really had much of a chance to prepare for today, but one of the things I found was a speech from Craig Venter at the time of the announcement. And it was amazing to hear what he was saying, because he was stating clearly that race has no biological basis. And what we have shown is that all humans on Earth share 99.9% of the DNA, and variations between individuals are much greater than variations between races. And that was, 17 years ago. And yet we're still having these conversations today with kind of race essentialists saying that it is based in science. And the Human Genome Project was meant to, I mean, if you look at the data, it should just settle these arguments. But bizarrely, it's actually reinforced some of the people who think this way. And it's maybe a little bit of a complicated thing to go into now, but essentially they took the same data and interpreted it in a totally different way to suit their, confirmation bias, to suit their preconceptions about race having a biological basis, which is an idea that goes back almost 200 years to the start of scientific racism and eugenics. And I was really struck by him saying these things so many years ago, and yet we're still having the same conversations. The more we've got now, petabytes more data of genetic data, and yet we're still arguing about this. But it's utterly clear, just to emphasize again, that there is no biological basis to race.
I do
We're
want
breaking news from 17 years ago.
Well, but it's a shame, right? It's like that you have to just keep breaking that news over and over and over again, because yeah, I mean, Rohin, like you say, like the folks who go to the source material and bend it and twist it to their deeply political motives. Like, they're not out to understand the science, they're out to make whatever point they've already decided is right.
Yeah.
Also, Y2K is not going to be that bad. I'm just like.
That's good. I'm glad you put that in there so that we could all be confident. Sally LePage is in the chat, so hi Sally, you're the best. She wanted to know, and I think this is a great question. Would you get a DNA test from a company like 23andMe or one of the other companies that will test your DNA and then hang on to it?
Absolutely not.
I would have put money on that answer.
And I have called my family members and been like, "Don't you dare."
Is it a privacy thing? What's the dimension?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100% privacy. Yep. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Rohin?
Rohin, how do you feel? I'm curious how a medical doctor feels about that.
No, I wouldn't either. I think the privacy concerns are valid, but even if we put that to one side, the other things that they offer, the kind of health information, like your risk of developing heart disease or something, is really pretty shoddy science. And the ancestry stuff again ties back to this. I think it again reinforces the idea. I'm 23% Native American and I'm 16% European, and all like this is nonsense.
And it's all wrapped up in this language of like who you are. Like I'm gonna find out like who. Ooh, nope.
And they're not explained well. Basically saying that there are clusters of alleles which we've looked at, which are common to certain geographic areas around the world, and you have a few of these alleles which are common in this area. It's nothing. It's not race. So saying giving this kind of numeric breakdown of your heritage makes it look so scientific. It makes it look like it's a fact. And I think, again, that just reinforces the idea that we're all fundamentally different, which I don't agree with.
Yeah, I actually have done 23andMe. I did it when I was at work because work paid for it so we could make a video about it. And then my parents did it because they wanted to know, because they lost a bunch of their family history over the years and wanted to know more about it. And so I don't think I would do it today. But at the time I was just like, oh, sure, if y'all are going to pay for it, I guess I'll do it. But now I get emails from them all the time that are like, do you want to participate in this research? Hey, we got new ancestry information about you. And I'm like, do you, though? Do you?
Yeah. I would love
on the level of spam, though, that's not even in my bottom 10% of emails I get. So.
Participate in this research study for this company?
Yeah, I feel okay about that. I did it, and I share all the concerns that have been shared. I would say like one benefit, or at least something that I'm interested in, is there have been a lot of researchers using the 23andMe data in like GWAS studies, these like large genetic studies that are revealing something. Like, I think what it tells me about me is pretty much not useful. I'm like better off talking to my parents about their medical history than I am about getting like this test. But like from a sense of like actually having me as an individual feel closer to research that's going on and having a population of people contributing to that, when science has really done just a shit job of recruiting representatives samples for studies in the past, it could be a benefit. It's like, it's too early to tell, but at least like I think there's some benefit. Now, whether you're telling me like whether it makes sense for me to pay $100 for that privilege, I'm not so sure. But
and the fact that it always, right, you can't, or maybe you can, and I just don't know about it, but like you can't contribute to the data set in that sort of like altruistic way and not have them come packaged with a bunch of paperwork that's like, here's who you are, and like here's
Totally. I view it as the ad-supported app on my phone. Like I have this like complicated relationship with it.
But I think that's like if you know that you're making that, if you're intentionally making that choice, then that's something.
Yeah, and I think for people that are unaware, like that is a big problem with a lot of these genetic data sets. And as Charles says in the chat, like, let's grow our data set because we really need to. This is heavily European biased. Like there's not, the data set's not a lot of information from Asian populations or, essentially non-European based populations or related populations. It's really fascinating to think about it. It means that like if someone says, oh, your ancestry is from Finland, it's like, cool, they probably had quite a bit of like a data set of people from that. And if they're like, your ancestry is from like Korea, they're going to have a very small data set. Like, and that makes it a little shakier. And so that it's tough. It's really tough.
And just to reinforce it, it's a problem right now. Like when we're doing all of this vaccine development process, like if they don't think about this, especially in the context of developing a vaccine that's going to be used at like billions of people on this planet, it's going to prove to be a huge struggle just from not just from a science side of things, but like what is the human buy-in to that? Like, is there a way that having more involvement in the process going to change the perspective people's have towards a therapeutic? So it's a issue that I think we need to address now.
On top of that, like to kind of circle back a little bit, Jesse in the chat asked about a time when we could get our genome read as basic medicine. And it's like, sure, if you are French, that could be very helpful. But if you are from some country where they have a bad data set or a lower data set, personalized medicine is still quite a ways off for you in comparison to somebody who's more represented in these data sets. And that's a problem. So it's like, great, we can get personalized medicine, but it's like, but not for everyone, and only for the people that you would expect based on societal and systemic problems that we've had.
Seems like this is a theme.
What?
It just keeps coming up.
I mean, one of the applications of this kind of testing, which is now available as standard care in the National Health Service in the UK, is for drug response. So, we know that some people will be poor responders to certain medications, or hello, or not respond at all. So this can now be checked with these kinds of things.
Yeah. Hi, Bobik.
Hi. Keep going. Sorry, I just didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
we're just talking about medical racism and stuff. Don't worry about it. Like lighthearted stuff.
Cheerful stuff.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I think we can move on from this topic a little bit, but I want to move on to some really good news which Kishore is bringing to us today that I think Mike and I didn't know. And Kishore bringing good news that's not always the thing. So this is great.
Right. I know we're obsessed with coronavirus, but let us talk about Ebola. So I'm going to transition to a deadlier virus. So Ebola is it comes from a different class of viruses, typically referred to as Ebola viruses sometimes. And there are existing outbreaks in the world. Ebola is different from SARS-CoV-2 in the sense that when you're infected, the mortality rate is somewhere between 25 and 50%. It is a hemorrhagic fever. So am I already off to the good start on like the
really
positive
great
vibes here?
Really
Okay.
super positive.
I'm
feeling
great. The first vaccine was approved by the U.S. FDA for Ebola in late 2019, I believe. And 2 days ago, we got word that the second largest outbreak of Ebola in the DRC is officially over. This is an outbreak that killed 20,000 people, or no, I'm sorry, it killed a few thousand people. I think something like 10,000 were infected. Let's see.
Jeez.
It's a lot.
Oh, so 370,000 people had been infected. And 7,000 have died at this point. And they've officially announced that it's over. There's no reported cases at this point. And this is a time of celebration. There's great imagery coming out of the Congo from the health workers celebrating this moment.
Yeah, I saw that. That brought a tear to my eye, actually. It was emotional to watch.
Yeah, they were singing songs together. It was very emotional. And I think the point of this was what they went through in talking to like community members and to try to stem the tide was challenging at a level that we haven't quite grappled with in terms of coronavirus yet, because there were armed militias that actually would go around and try to hunt down some of the healthcare workers that were delivering Ebola treatments, because they were so distrustful of that these treatments were actually going to help them. They thought they were coming in to hurt them. And there is just the severe distrust, and then just the geography of moving around to a population that was fairly spread out was also challenging as well. So this is an enormous triumph, and it is a triumph not of, I mean, I think we'll point to the science, but this is a triumph of humans. Like what worked here was like healthcare workers on the ground going and just spending time and developing relationships with people so that they took up the responsibility of stopping this. That's why this ended. Like we can point to some of the medical breakthroughs and whatnot that helped contain this, but really it was those individuals. And I think there's a lot of lessons that we can glean from what happened in the Congo that apply to us now. But it's over. This like Ebola is like on the worst case scenario of a pandemic. It's pretty high up there. So this is just wonderful news.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I have to go. Okay, sorry.
No.
On that note, but I
You
got my
literally-
positive note from Kishore. I'm ready to go. Like I'm feeling good, guys. So I'm sorry. More meetings, but
Are you really
Nice meeting you
leaving?
guys.
Oh God,
yeah,
you
if you have
jumped
more
in. You got medical
Aw, what a
racism, and you got
tease.
I know.
Ebola being done. So that's good, but
Look,
some negatives
he has
as
to
well.
go like get things onto other planets. I feel like those meetings are important.
Well, thanks for
All right.
stopping
Well,
in,
perfect.
Bobak.
Nice
Hi.
to
Good seeing you
see you. I'm
guys.
a big fan, by the way. It's nice to
Oh,
meet
we'll
you.
talk soon then. All right, bye.
Bye. That was funny and weird
Oh,
and
so
nice.
nice.
Yeah,
Oh,
it was nice to see
I
him.
didn't realize it was going to be that brief.
Yeah, I
No,
didn't either.
usually he's here the whole time, and so, but it is kind of funny. Is like his next meeting is probably like has to do with like a lot of math around like trajectories and orbits and like precise engineering, which is slightly different from what we were talking about here.
I feel like
on the
this is
order
a.
of,
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, on the order of outliers, I'm gonna go edit a podcast later. So like,
I feel like
all
this is
you
where
can
we
just-
smash cut to Bobak going into his meeting where they talk about who hasn't been cleaning the coffee grounds from the coffee machine or something, But, since he works at home, it's just him talking to himself, I guess. Well, I think I'm feeling good about our success as humanity. Like, I know it's not always the human cost of any disease, any kind of, especially a horribly infectious disease like something like Ebola, is never going to make people happy. But the fact that we can say we, as a group, like as a human group, did something about it, that's a good message, I think. That's something that the United States really needs right now. I can't speak for the UK, but the US is number one still. We are still number one, guys. That's great. Yay.
not to take? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it reminds me of the kind of the polio, people who have worked over the last few decades to essentially or near eradicate polio. And I remember reading a very sort of moving essay, I think by Atul Gawande, about the polio workers in India and Pakistan, and how, in his clinical practice, same as mine, on a good day, we'll treat maybe like 8 people, 9 people. And these people who are putting their lives at risk, particularly in Pakistan, where the team that got the intelligence for Osama bin Laden had gone under the guise of healthcare workers, which has led to a lot of problems since. So these people are putting their lives on the line, and they're affecting the millions of people's lives. So it's amazing, and yeah, I agree. It's something that really should be highlighted when the success that we've had against Ebola now.
So let's move on to another topic that Mike wanted to talk about, which is a complete shift from Ebola and infectious diseas. But
what deadly disease are you going to talk about, Mike?
But it is related. I do think it's
the art market.
Yeah. I think it is related, though. Like, during times of upheaval, there are lots of different arts that come into our kind of worldview. And I don't know, Mike, what is it that you wanted to talk about today?
I had found myself seeing just in Twitter and in conversations with my family and other people this sentiment come up again and again, and it is one that I am guilty also of communicating in the past. And so I'm not saying like, man, everybody's I'm right and everybody's wrong, but like, it's this sentiment that in times of social upheaval or turmoil, or times of, I think what you see a lot in like the literature is transition. You see people commenting like, oh, I mean, it's gonna be bad, but like, whoa, think about the art. There's gonna be so much good art that comes out of this. And this was like a big, I remember having this conversation with several people when Donald Trump was elected president. People were like, whoa, okay, this is bad, but like, there's gonna be this very communal coming together, and there's going to be a lot of material for artists commenting on the state of things and fighting against oppressive powers and pointing out how power is allocated in their artwork. And so there's going to be basically like lots of raw material. And I think that that's maybe the thesis that like is stated when someone says something like this, that like, oh, there's turmoil, there's going to be a lot of good art, is that like turmoil is one of the raw materials for art making, and when there's more turmoil, there's more to be made into art. Or like there's going to be more people who are going to be inspired to work out their stuff or their opinions or their ideas in art. And like I find myself being like having a really ambivalent reaction to that sentiment. And I think on the one hand it's like people are always in turmoil. Like there is always societal ill and social trouble, and whole classes of people are attempting to tell you through their art, like all the time, 100% of the time. There was this really good Wyatt Cenac tweet that I wanna read. This was like 2 weeks ago. He tweeted, "Black people have been calling out racism for generations. We said it calmly, we shouted it in the streets, we put it in writing, we put it in our music, in our movies and our shows, we put it on stages, in our art, and you danced, and you laughed, and you clapped, but you never heard." And I think that's like a sort of related idea that like, you know, those folks are always trying to tell you, you know, and I think that like the role of the artist in a lot of ways, in a lot of places, is always, or the we're getting into like judgment calls, like a good artist or the real artist is someone who acts as like a pusher of boundaries. I think it was Larry Neal, who was like a Black artist and art critic, wrote that the artist and the political activist are one. They're both shapers of the future of reality. So it's like, you know, this is always what artists are doing. But then on the other hand, I think when people say like, oh, there's going to be a lot of good art, like there's going to be turmoil and there's going to be a lot of creative a lot of creative output from it, but like they're also announcing like, I, as a person, am now ready to listen to what the artists have to say, which like is sort of telling on yourself and maybe kind of bad, but also kind of good that you're saying like, okay, like I know there's people out there who are going to react to this, and I am looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Part of me worries that like what that means is I'm looking forward to buying a record in a year, and not I'm looking forward to challenging myself with aesthetic experiences, like going to the local theater or going to see performance art in my neighborhood. I'm going to push myself to have art experiences that I wouldn't normally have because I want to see how these people are reacting to the current moment. But like that worry might just be me being a cynic.
So there's one point of optimism that I hear in that statement that I agree that I've heard everywhere. Like great art will emerge from this time, and that there is something unique about this moment in the sense that most of us have been quarantined or in shelter in place for an extended period of time. So like the distractions of daily life of like going out to a restaurant, catching a movie, doing X have been stripped away, so that there's just more quote unquote time
Sure.
For people to create. So we might see this kind of like explosion of output compared to before. And that's what I kind of heard in that. I totally agree. Like the art has been there all along. Like we aren't telling new stories in terms of what we're seeing now. I agree with Wyatt's like thesis there, but I also think there might actually be more created because of the physical restraints on us.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think it's funny to kind of watch artists react to people saying, "Oh, can't wait till all that art comes out," because like even in the chat, Lena is saying like that's nonsense. Artists create because they need to create. The trauma, you can help deal with the trauma when you create, but the trauma is not a prerequisite of artistic creation. I think that is an awesome point. And it's like this really sad kind of, I don't know, stereotype about tortured artists, and like those are the only ones that can be any good. And I keep thinking about this Netflix comedian that maybe you saw, Hannah Gadsby, who did, I think it's called Nanette was hers, and it was so good. And she talks a little bit about this, but she touches on that along with a number of other things that are, I'm not going to spoil it, but I highly recommend, like, if I'm going to give people homework, that's what it's going to be, is to go watch Hannah Gadsby's Netflix special, just because it's really powerful. And she talks about trauma, and she talks about art, and she talks about like comedy, and she talks about her growing up as like an LGBTQ person in her society that she grew up in. It was so fascinating and so hard to watch, but also there were parts that were funny, but there were also parts that were not funny and like really raw, and it was very good. And she has a follow-up. I haven't watched it yet, so if you've watched it, let me know if it's good in the chat, but I'm planning on it. But I thought about that as well, because she brings up like this idea that this trauma that she has experienced in her life, wouldn't that just be good fodder for her comedy? And it's like, really? That's really?
No.
I think that also places like a very strange expectation on like what you want from art. Like, what do you want your art to be someone who is going through a traumatic experience and is processing it through like theater or through through music or whatever, or do you want someone who is going through a complicated and meaningful time and wants to use their art to show someone else what their experience is like? And I just think, yeah, it's weird that like we go to, oh, it's hard, good art, and not like, whoa, there's a lot that we need to explain to each other. Good art.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
Or maybe that is where people are going, and I'm just reading to, like, what I'm hearing is trauma, and what they are saying is like, we need to get on the same page. But it doesn't feel to me like a call to solidarity. It feels to me like a claim that difficulty begets aesthetic momentum.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that, I guess specifically of all of us, you, Mike, and you, Rohin, make videos that are designed to educate people about a thing. And some of those videos, like, there are times that you've made those videos as a response to somebody saying, essentially, like, ugh, whatever you're doing, it's bad. Or, like, whatever you're doing needs to be explained better, right? Like, people need to understand what it's like to be a doctor in these certain times. People need to understand what these diseases are about. People need to understand, like, this art or this philosophy or this idea. And you two are working on explaining those things out of, I wouldn't necessarily call it trauma, except for as a pun for Rohin, but like, the idea is that it was this hardship that you're like, oh, we can dig into this and like explore this hardship a little bit. Like, do you think that's a fair characterization?
So, I mean, I think that's similar to a point I was going to say, actually, that I totally agree with the points that have already been raised, and how personal turmoil is not a prerequisite to art or conducive to making good art. But I think when there's a shared kind of hardship, like a global pandemic or war, classically being the example of the past, we've seen songs and poetry come out of war, not necessarily because the poems or songs were any better, but there was a shared experience that people then can, there's a power to art that comes out of that kind of time. So I think there's maybe a slight difference between personal hardship and a kind of shared experience that can lead to appreciating art in a different way, maybe.
I think that's maybe the other part of, sorry, Kishore, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's maybe the other part of like the more positive way to look at it is like, if people are saying I am announcing my availability to the meaningfulness of these artworks at this moment, then like those are precisely the moments where that artwork can do the most work, and it can really accomplish the goals that it is setting out to do, which is like point out how power is misallocated, put some draw some bright outlines around how things could be better, or how things have been bad, and we now as a group of people working together towards a common goal can make things better for other people. Like, yeah, that's I'm picking up what you're putting down, is what I'm saying.
I will say the one thing that I saw that also kind of inspires me around this is when I saw curators from the Smithsonian walking around DC a couple weeks ago after like the peak of the protests, and cataloging and pulling signs and taking pictures of signs to like capture the history of the art that was created in the moment too.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and to see like curators of the Smithsonian, which to me, I'm not an artist, but like I still look at the Smithsonian as like it's like the great American museum, saying like this is a moment to capture history, and what they looked for wasn't necessarily just like the artifacts, but the actual pieces that showed the emotional weight of those moments. Like I'm not waiting to see that because we see that every day pouring out.
Yeah.
But like that's an institution of power. It's an institution of government taking notice of what was happening, and to me that was felt different because when you like read about stories of civil rights unrest, like we don't hear stories of like institutions going around and capturing those moments like that.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think the institutional recognition of the support and even the aesthetic value of these things and these artifacts is really, really important. But I think as not just art consumers, but as participants in a society, we also have to recognize that like that's not enough. And there are things about those institutions that are fundamentally broken, and that we should view the recognition of the art market and art infrastructure, like their recognition of the importance of these things as an inspiration to go and have direct experiences like outside of that infrastructure. Because like if they're recognizing that this stuff is important, then that means that there's probably like extremely vital, like very local work that it like is gonna blow your mind. But maybe that's my like, grew up going to punk rock shows in a basement and lives in New York and spends $7 to go to the weird performance art shows.
As somebody that also grew up on punk rock shows, no one's story of punk rock shows start with like I went to that punk rock show at the stadium. Like no one starts with the big punk rock show. Everyone had to start in like the dingy, dirtiest bathroom in all of history type place. Like my first like I remember I was like 16 and I went to see Rancid play in this like terrible spot that I should not have been allowed into.
Yeah, that's the place.
Outside
that's the
of
place
Pittsburgh.
You have to go. Yeah.
And I got punched in the face on the floor, like
Oh, no.
like in a mosh pit kind of way, like not like on purpose.
It was a friendly
like
punch. Yeah,
it was a punk rock punch, but it definitely made me feel punk rock. But I was like, all the punk rock stories have to start that way.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing is that's the point of I hope that what people are saying is not this is going to make a really good album by a band that I like in a year, or I'm going to go to the show at the MoMA in a year and a half that results of this. But like what people are saying is, oh, there are artists who are in the communities that we are advocating for and who are experiencing this turmoil. Like I am going to go see like some Black noise artists in Philly, because that artistic experience is going to teach me so much about what it is like to be a member of that community and to understand the perspective that we're advocating for out on the streets. And that's just very different from the like infrastructurally recognized art output.
My favorite's a weird word here, like tone deaf statement that I've seen is I saw somebody, it was either on Twitter or Instagram, say I'm really excited for the next Childish Gambino album after this, and I was like, but the last album was
also about this.
It was about this. Like,
Yeah.
Anyways, I can send it to Trace and we can post it somewhere. But there's a list that's been going around in relationship to Bandcamp Friday. If you guys are familiar with Bandcamp Friday, it's the like a once a month they donate all of their cut of music sales to a charity, and they recently did this on Juneteenth, and they gave all of their money to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And in
Cool.
response to that, some people made a list of, I think it's like at this point over 1,800 Black musicians, producers, and labels. And it is just some of the most, I cannot describe how good it is. Like, no matter what your taste is, there's stuff on there that is unbelievable. And I think speaks to this, like, you know, like the vitality and direct communication of these like really important cultural and social experiences that you can get from these artworks. So like I can figure out where to post it, and we'll post it somewhere.
I did put it in the chat so people can see.
Good. Look at you.
It's a Google sheet, right? So 1,000 producers
Yeah.
and their associated Bandcamp pages.
Yeah.
So did a couple Googles, found it real quick, because I didn't want people to like lose focus. You know, we got some viewers here now. May as well give it to them. So that is super cool, and I am loving the like. Who would have thought that Google Docs would be like a tool of the resistance? Like, it's so great that people can, when you give them tools that are like, hey, do you want to categorize some information and share it with everyone? Hey, here's a word processor and a spreadsheet that you can use. It's just great. Like, I think that's awesome. It's almost artistic. I mean,
it's it's a really yeah.
So I posted it both in the chat. On the stream, you'll see it twice, but I posted on the YouTube and on the Twitch page for our one Twitch viewer. So enjoy it, that Twitch person. So we're running out of time here. This is already almost 4 o'clock. So if anybody's got any questions to throw in the chat here at the end, I just want to do, it's sort of an extended plug for my next series, which is somewhat related to what we're talking about, but not really at all. We're talking about like humans and art, and we're talking about kind of how this tragedy is going to change things. And what my next series is completely unrelated, actually, in that respect. But it is about kind of people who've experienced tragedy and people who are trying to struggle, and that is about brain-computer interfaces. So I've been talking to a lot of scientists this last week, bioengineers mainly, which is fascinating, about tapping into our brains to do all sorts of really cool stuff, including like obviously moving limbs that you no longer have or don't have access to. For example, if you're paraplegic or quadriplegic, you can't move your arms and legs, but through a computer you could potentially feed yourself with a robotic arm and stuff. And I'm framing it in the way of like brain upgrades. But right now I am writing an episode about reading and writing from the brain, which is really crazy. Like really interesting, because the brain runs on electricity and hormones, essentially. And if you think of hormones as kind of the low level, it's kind of lifts up or like slows down the whole process, like injecting lighter fluid into a grill. Whereas like the electricity are the actual like signals that are being sent all back and forth. So it's going to be really cool to try and figure out how to write a video that explains all of this, because it's a lot. But I talked to 3 different bioengineers, one at the University of Central Florida, one who she is in the Bay Area, and then one at the University of Michigan. And they all essentially talked about it in the same way, which is to say, we know about this much of it, and then after that, we're just like, I don't know what's going on. So it's going to be really cool.
I mean, that's extremely exciting though, right? To like know this much and then...
Yeah. We know enough to know that shit's crazy. We know that much. Yeah. I was talking to Liesl Richardson. She's the University of Central Florida bioengineer, and she's the mother of neurons is her, I think, tag and handle. She's awesome. And she said, I was like, okay, so one neuron sends a message via an electrical charge, which is managed via various ions. So this cell sends an ion charge to the next cell. Is that sort of like binary, like on-off? She's like, well, one neuron can accept lots of different charges and then only send out one or none. It's just like something is going on inside of the neuron that we don't quite understand. And I'm like, so it's like a packet of information then. So I get a bunch of stuff and then I send that packet to the next cell. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, so what's in the packet? She's like,
who can say really?
We don't really know.
I just want to talk about the energy you're putting out into the world when you have a handle mother of neurons. I love it.
Yeah.
I love that scientist energy thrown out there.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So this is, I think, one of those things where it's funny how a lot of the bioengineers came from the engineering side and not the biology side. A lot of people came from it thinking it's like mechanical, and then they have to put their creativity to work in a space they don't understand. So another person I talked to, Charlene Flesher, she's based in the Bay Area, she said that she had this boss who was working on the cerebellum, which I don't know, maybe Rohin knows more than I do. Allegedly, she said a lot of people get into the cerebellum because it looks like a circuit board. Like things are at 90-degree angles, like the connections look very organized and simple. It's like where our motor control comes from. So people get in there and engineers are like, oh, it's just circuits. We got it. And then it turns out that's not the case at all. And they spend their entire career trying to figure out one little thing and they never get there. And it's crazy. I don't know.
Have you encountered a guy called Neil Harbison in your research for this stuff? So he was the...
Sounds familiar, but I don't know. Tell me more.
He was the world's first legally recognized cyborg.
Oh, yes. That's why it sounds familiar.
An antenna in his head, implanted into his skull by a surgeon who only agreed to do it on the grounds that he'd remain anonymous. And he was getting his passport photo taken for his British passport, and it was returned saying you're not supposed to have any accessories, and he argued that this is part of him. So they actually recognized that this is part of his person, this antenna. So he was born with a condition where he can't see any color at all. So like extreme color blindness, he just sees in black and white, and that this antenna has a camera which then produces sounds directly into his brain, not sort of via his ear, based on the colors that are being seen. And he's now, I think, trying to have a system, because this has led to a kind of synesthesia where he's got senses combined. He's now trying to get a system where something will go around his head, like it'll apply pressure on a 24-hour cycle around his head. And then if he slows it down, he thinks he can adjust his perception of time or speed it up. Like, we all experience a few hours fly by, or other times things go really slowly. So his theory is by adjusting the speed of this pressure around his skull, he'll be able to alter his perception of time. So just very interesting character.
That is fascinating. I'm definitely going to have to look into that, because right now I'm writing the Language of the Brain episode, which is going to be about halfway through the series, and thinking about what, like, because brains could talk to each other, like if you plugged them into each other. If I plugged my brain into your brain, even via the internet, I could move your arm, because it would work the same. Okay. Our brains speak the same language in that respect, even if you didn't speak verbally the same language. And so understanding kind of how we can augment is further on in the series, and I'm pretty excited about it.
That's cool.
Look forward to that.
Yeah,
we should do really some plugs so people can keep up to date with everyone.
Yes, absolutely. I'm gonna just drink this beer right here. Rohin, why don't you tell everybody where they can come find you?
Yes, so my main hangout is YouTube, but I'm on Twitter. I've just posted my second TikTok.
Congratulations!
Less than 24 hours ago, and it's got 500,000 views already.
What?
So,
did you
crazy.
Do the Renegade or something? What'd you do?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's just a video I made of.
Oh, it's just a collaboration with Addison Rae. No big deal.
No, it was just very. I don't know what the formula is here, but yeah, I'm 2 TikToks in. So but yeah, midlife crisis. Wherever you want, you'll find me.
I also thought you were, when you started talking, I thought you were going to be like, you can find me in the trauma unit at X hospital or something.
Might also be true, but like, don't just show up, right?
Appointments encouraged, yeah.
Can I actually, that's a question I have. Have you ever had a patient who's watched your YouTube channel? Like somebody comes in and they're like, what?
Not a patient, but when I'd treated a lady and she had a heart attack, and I did her procedure and everything. And then I was walking up to the intensive care unit, and this guy came up to me and goes, "Hey, you're Dr. Rohin, right? And I'm like, oh God. And I thought maybe I've caused some massive complication and like killed his
You're
mother.
served. Like, here's your subpoena for, yeah, right.
And because it was this lady's son, and I said, yeah, what have I done? He goes, oh yeah, I watch your YouTube channel. So that was the only experience I've had with related to a patient. But thankfully, I think it would be very strange if a patient recognized me, but not yet.
Was that experience fun or like a little mortifying or like kind of both?
No, it was just weird. It wasn't
right,
fun at all. No, I'm quite awkward with things like that.
So VidCon may not be for you, is what you're saying.
VidCon, I went this year, but because I live down the road, I just turned up at the end of each day about 5 o'clock, met my friends and left. So I didn't.
That's
really
honestly the best VidCon experience. I highly recommend exactly that.
Yeah, so I don't think I missed out a great deal, to be honest.
No, you got the VidCon experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Mike? Where can people find you? Of course, there's also links down in the description because I know Mike's going to say a bunch of different things. All his links are down in the description, just like Rohin's.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at just my name, Mike Rugnetta. You can find Fun City, the cyberpunk actual play podcast that I do, at Fun City Ventures on Twitter and Instagram, and on the internet at funcity.ventures. It's also Fun City, just on everywhere that you listen to podcasts. And I also make a podcast about sound called Reasonably Sound. I haven't released an episode of that in a while, but what I say is that show is never on hiatus. I'm just working very, very slowly. So I have 2 episodes of that in the works. One of which was about call centers that I had to stop because call centers became like an interesting case study for the spread of COVID. So like I'm waiting for a bunch of research to come in about that. So yeah, that might be the next one. We'll see. Cool. And also whether or not people who work at call centers are essential workers. There were a lot of sort of arguments about whether or not those people should be considered essential. Yeah.
Interesting.
So you can find Reasonably Sound. Just Google Reasonably Sound, or that also is everywhere you find podcasts.
Mike is not busy at all, you guys. He doesn't do a lot of things. He's like stay in his lane, does his one thing.
That's it. Just the one thing.
You can check me out. I'm on the tested.com podcast every Wednesday. I have a series there that I'm doing called Living with COVID. And next up is a researcher from New Zealand who will be talking about what really worked there and how they really banded together to get to 0 cases.
Man, I wonder what it's like living in a country that works.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you either.
Yeah.
Most of my questions are like that.
Yeah, seems great.
Yeah, it starts out like a normal conversation, then be like, so how much are houses? And like,
what's the citizenship process like?
Yeah.
Are there good breweries around? Is it very walkable? Then Wednesday nights, I host a movie screening called Big Screen Science, where we screen movies we like and talk about the science afterwards. This coming Wednesday is Rocky IV, which has way more science than Rocky IV should have, but we're gonna make it work. And it's my favorite of the Rockies. Don't at me. It's really not the best Rocky movie, but it's my favorite. And then I want to recommend an op-ed in the New York Times. You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument, by Carolyn Randall Williams, which is the best thing I read this week.
That's a great title. Wow.
That is a great title.
And it is more unapologetic than the title.
All right. Hell yeah.
Wow. Geez, the 2 punk rockers over there are like, yeah! Well, on that note, I'd like to thank all of our audience for watching, and there are a number of donations for the Center for Policing Equity, so thank you to all of those people who donated. Of course, you can donate outside of this stream, and I highly recommend that you do. We also were taking donations, and I think still worth pointing out, Feeding America can still use help. There are lots of places that you don't think about that could still use help if you're feeling like donating, places outside of what you're seeing on the news every day. People still need food. This is still a pandemic. People still need policing equity. People still need NAACP resources. People still need housing help. There are all sorts of places that if you're feeling like you need to help and can't get outside and protest with others and show with your body and like your voice and show up that way, there are other ways to show up too. So without being political, I think that's patriotic no matter where you live. So do that. So thanks so much for tuning into SciComm Happy Hour. We talked about some art. We talked about some science. We talked about some dad jokes. I mean, we didn't really have a dad joke, I don't think. I made the trauma joke. That was maybe the closest.
I don't know. Rohin's shirt is like the ultimate dad.
Pretty good.
Like
Yeah.
repping Dr. Hibbert.
True. That's pretty good. Who is your favorite TV doctor?
Zoidberg.
Nice.
Yes, that is a great answer.
I think Spachemin.
Wow.
I'm a big Spachemin
Spachemin?
fan. Yeah, he's great. He's pretty
Sounds
great.
pretty good.
Even though he's abusive, I'm a Dr. Cox. I love Scrubs.
He's pretty abusive.
Oh, he's great. Yeah, he's a role model. Well, so Zoidberg, to be honest.
Yeah.
Whoop, 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 whoop. So with that, we're out of here. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next
Thanks,
Friday for
friends.
more SciComm Happy
Thanks.
Hour.